Well, Matt, I'd love to have you back out after I read your book. It looks fantastic because that is the world we're living in, one corporatocracy, right?
Yep. Well, the book's thesis is essentially that when former empire collapsed in the 50s and 60s, the investors, the corporations, the people that have been in control through former empire, i.e. garrisons of troops in the country where you can just take out a leader if it expropriates your assets or does something you don't like. When that collapsed, they needed to create a new international, supranational governance system, which went above the heads of national governments, which were increasingly falling into the hands of liberation governments and liberation movements. So they created this supranational system. As you say, it sounds tinfoil hat stuff, but it's all there in black and white.
Is that Five Eyes or something?
Well, this is more
the World Bank. So the World Bank particularly was about, which was created at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire in 1944, was about creating a mechanism through which corporations and investors could enforce their will on the rest of the world when former empire collapsed. And there's many mechanisms. The book opens, I'll finish with this, with one specific system, which is called Investor State Dispute Settlement, ISDS, which sounds boring, but what it is a shadow legal system through which multinational corporations sue governments all around the world for enacting policies they don't like. That could be not granting them an environmental permit to dig for gold. It could be raising the minimum wage. It could be doing anything that we think of as acting for a civilized society. If corporations don't like that, they can take you to this body at the World Bank called ICSID. Sorry, there's a lot of acronyms in this, and they can sue you. And this has seen the transfer of billions of dollars from some of the poorest countries in the world to some of the richest corporations. And it also has a regulatory and policy making chill effect, because countries all around the world now, their internal deliberations when they're thinking about doing certain policies or in the interest of their people, they're worried about, are we going to get hit with one of these suits by one of these multinational corporations and get sued for billions? So that's just one example.
So what he's talking about, Kurt, is, let's say, for instance, the state of Washington says you can't bring a single hold oil tanker into our harbors. You have to have double hold, right, for safety. Well, now Exxon or British Petroleum or anybody could sue in this court that he's talking about saying that you're screwing over our way to make money, and they'll win.
I thought, remember the TPP?
It's part of that stuff.
So was this before that even, and it was already there?
It's already
been there. It didn't happen because the TPP.
No, it already did.
No, it was already there. But this system is enshrined in free trade agreements, and free trade agreements is a misnomer. Free trade agreements, a small part of them is about trade. What they're about is enshrining a legal system which allows corporations to enforce their will. ISDS, or this multinational corporations being able to sue national governments, is part of it, but there's many other legal mechanisms embedded in these free trade agreements. And they're bilateral investment treaties. There's this web of treaties, agreements across the world that enshrine this mechanism and many others through which corporations render democracy effectively meaningless.
And so exactly right. It takes democracy away from the people. It takes your favorite word. It takes sovereignty away from the people.
Do I have to find Jesus?
That's what it does.
This is by design as well. This is by design. It's not a mistake. They talk about.
I believe that.
In the after, I don't know if you guys know about in Iran, the coup in 1953 when the Iranian Democratic Prime Minister
Mossadegh
nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You're not allowed to do that. No, you can't take control of your own resources. The CIA and MI6 in a joint operation took out the Democratic Prime Minister of Iran. It's never been a democracy again. The year after, the CIA, at the behest of United Fruit, took out the Democratic president of Guatemala because he wanted to redistribute a little bit of fallow land to the poor peasants. You're not allowed to do that either. 1956, Nasser in Egypt nationalizes the Suez Canal. France, Israel, and Britain invade. You're not allowed to do that either. You can't take control. So in the aftermath of all that, they set up these systems whereby you didn't have to go hard like that. You could just make it so there was what Thomas Friedman calls a golden straitjacket. You can't move. He called it a golden straitjacket. It's obviously not golden, but that straitjacket is imposed on all developing world countries effectively, and it's very hard to escape. That means you follow the Washington line, you follow the corporate line, or you find out what will happen.
And if you don't follow the corporate line, the United States says that you're oppressing your people. You're a dictator, and we have to bring some liberty to your country. So when I found out that Venezuela, which we couped twice already in the last 20 years, when I found out that Venezuela had more oil than Saudi Arabia, I knew it was just a matter of time before we had to bring their people some democracy. And
we wouldn't do that just for oil.
It's like, what's all our oil doing underneath your land, you sons of bitches? And so that's what's going on. That's why they say Maduro's a dictator and all that stuff. And it's what they've always done, right?
Yeah, right.
And so that's what you're talking about in this book, right?
Yeah, and it's what's happening now in Mexico with AMLO. He nationalized the lithium industry in Mexico, and literally, as night follows day, the corporate media in the United States, David Frum in Atlantic and loads of other articles, immediately said AMLO is a dictator. It was instant after. And
I saw,
yes,
on YouTube.
The empire activates their media assets because they have a new target. And targets are people who want to take control of their resources and use those resources for the people who sit on top of them. That is the red line for the empire. You are not allowed to use your resources. Those resources are for multinational corporations, and they're for the 1% in the West.
So Gaddafi met a similar fate. Gaddafi had the most successful country on the continent of Africa. Everybody had healthcare, everybody had housing, everybody had education, everybody had everything. And he wanted to start his own dollar. He wanted to get off the U.S. back, or he wanted to start a currency for Africa. And you can't do that.
Thank God we got him.
And they got him. And that they said he was oppressing his people and he was going to kill all these people in his own country. And so we had to go free him. What we did was we handed the country over to terrorists, and now they have open slave markets, and it's a failed state.
You're welcome.
And you're welcome.
To the Mexico thing, the way I just started seeing videos pop up about, hey, we might have to go send in troops to deal with these cartels. These cartels are really bad.
Yeah.
I got suspicious when they suddenly cared deeply about some Americans who were killed, who were black,
right?
Getting a Brazilian butt lift. That's the most the government's ever cared about some black people.
Yeah, I know.
Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I did a story recently for Declassified, actually, on the 20th anniversary of the war in Iraq, where I went through the annual reports of BP, British Petroleum, to find out how much Iraqi oil they'd extracted after the British invasion. It was 15 billion pounds worth of Iraqi oil. They got interest in the largest oil field in Iraq called Rumaila near Basra, which was when they got that contract, the British Army was actually literally occupying the area where the oil field was. So it was a very literal form of imperialism, and that's how the world runs. It's all about resources. All the rest of it is all PR for the pros, and that another part of the book is about the aid industry, what is called the aid industry, where we're told foreign aid budget is about transfer of wealth to the poor. It's all rubbish. It's all about enshrining this corporate system, and it's all about greasing the entry of corporations into the developing world. And they talk about it internally in those terms, but their public posture is obviously about, we want to spread wonderful things, and the stated goal of the World Bank is to alleviate global poverty. It's a sick joke.
So the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is there to steal natural resources from poor countries and give it to national corporations and billionaires. That's exactly what they do. And so they give them these loans they can never repay, and then when they don't, they come in and they seize their public spaces and their their infrastructure, their part, whatever, and they give it to private corporate. And that's what and that's in your book too.
Yeah, well, there's a whole arm. We focus on one arm of the World Bank called the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector lending arm. They lend money to private companies to go into the developing world. And I went to a diamond mine in Tanzania, which is funded by the World Bank. I went to a 5-star hotel in Myanmar. This is one of the poorest countries in the world that is funded by the World Bank. What they do is they subsidize corporations all around the world. They give them non-commercial loans to go into different countries. They gave $1 billion. There's development financing gave $1 billion to Lidl, which is a supermarket. It's a bit like Walmart, to go into Eastern Europe. It's really sick stuff, but this happens all around the world. And that is perhaps the most ugly part of this, is that as they're restructuring societies to say to make them work in the interests of the 1% and investors and corporations, they always say how we're doing it for you, we're doing it for the good of humanity. It's always wrapped up in all this ideology and all this rubbish. But pretty much you have to believe that rubbish to work in the corporate media. And I worked for 2 years at the Financial Times, and it's impossible to get any of these truths that we've been talking about into the Financial Times, because that would be really dangerous. You're not allowed to understand how the world really works, because then things might change. So the mass media is controlled, and you can't get the truth about the corporate ruled society we live in and the corporate ruled international system that operates from the corporate owned media. That's just something that's not structurally ever going to happen.
Yeah, it's called the Overlord window, I believe.
Yes.
Next, you're going to tell me that Pride Month is some corporate bullshit. Jesus, what's next?
Wow. It could. I try to tell people, corporations don't really give a shit about LGBTQIA plus 2S. They don't give a fuck. They do that so you guys will come buy more of their shit. That's all it is. You think Walmart really wants to embrace Elton John? They just doing that because he's going to help them sell shit.
You understand? It's like when these little old ladies giving a TV preacher their pension. They're kind of in on it on a level. The people being scammed, they want I want to buy a lot of stupid shit. I just want to feel this much better about it, but don't want to really do anything. So they're helping each other.
Maybe, yeah.
Identity politics is a cultural phenomenon which is rooted in the corporate takeover of our society and our political system.
I remember World War II.
The culture war is a gift to the corporate sector, because no one talks about the structural economic issues, which are really the pressing issues. They're talking about all these issues that don't hit the bottom line of corporations, which they love.
So why are the Democrats talking? Because the Democrats stopped representing working people when Bill Clinton became president, and that's why they lost to Donald Trump. And it's exactly what he's talking about. It's that they talk about woke politics and identity politics because they don't want to talk about the economic issues that are screwing over everybody. So they want you to get hating half the country and keeping your ire for your neighbor instead of joining with your neighbor and putting your ire on the oligarchy, which is keeping 80% of workers living paycheck to paycheck. Half the country can't afford a $400 emergency, and you still go bankrupt when you get ill in this country. And people are living under every bridge. They won't even fix the fucking bridges. Okay, so that's how bad it's gotten, and that's exactly what he's talking about in this book. And that's why when you see people out there screaming about calling someone a transphobe and everybody's a white supremacist, they're doing the bidding of corporations, because that's what corporations want you talking about. They don't want you talking about how they're using slaves to make their shit. Nike wants you talking. They want you talking about Colin Kaepernick, not about the fucking prisoners making the shit that Colin Kaepernick's wearing.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's the thing, that the whole system and the elite they're trying to make every election season, they're trying to make the working class vote against their own class interests.
And they do it.
And they do it. But the way they do it is to make them focus on these
cultural issues. Yes, ancillary. Yes, bathroom issues, Bud Light commercials, a critical race theory, all that shit. That it's all bullshit.
And it happens in this country as well. Margaret Thatcher used it. She was a very successful prime minister in terms of getting elected, but she hammered the poor. But the working class voted
just like Reagan. Finally, somebody stood up to the penniless. Huh?
Too good for too long.
Yeah. And it's only going one way. I have to say, it's not an optimistic outlook, to be honest.
No.
Corporation, this coup that we describe in the book, that's been going on. It's been going on for 400 years. Because if you remember, like the first modern chartered corporate joint stock corporation was created in the 16th century in England, and since then they've been fighting a civil rights battle to get more and more power from the state. That really took off in the 19th century. But after the Second World War was when it went international in a real sense. That was the age of the multinational. And in 2023, we're kind of at the end of the coup. The coup is complete.
Yes.
We do not have a political system that is separate to the corporate system. Governments are working for corporations. Even the nominal power they exercise, which is separate to corporations, is working in the interests of corporations. I'll just end with an anecdote, we went to 25 countries and talked to victims of this corporate system around the world, from peasants in Tanzania who were getting their land grabbed by corporations, or trade unionists in Colombia who were getting killed by paramilitaries hired by corporations. And I'd always ask them, I'd say, what's your government doing to help you against these corporations? And they said, no, that's a silly question. The government works for the corporation. They don't work for us. They understand that on the ground. And it's the same in the US. It's the same in the UK. That coup is now complete. The government is not working for the people. The government is working for the corporations, and they're working off screen, so we don't see it. And they want us distracted with all these other enemies that we're meant to have. And also, I do think that there are a lot of conspiracy theories, real ones, not the ones that the security state make up, but around. And I think that's a lot of it is because people are struggling to understand where power lies in our society because they're not told by the mainstream media.
It's overwhelming to see it.
What's that?
It's overwhelming to see it because everybody's compartmentalized. Yeah. So I watch like friends of mine. They understood Iraq war was a mistake or whatever, and they still don't put the whole picture. They're like, okay, if you just knew a person whose history was this bad, would you trust them ever again? But they don't look at it. They go, that was one thing, but now it's better. Somebody's looking into it, I'm sure. It's totally a different thing.
Well, that was a big boo-boo that Trump made when he revealed that there was a deep state that actually controlled things. And that's when they tried to make him seem like he was crazy for saying that. Right. But Chuck Schumer actually revealed the truth about that statement when he told Rachel Maddow on national television that Trump is being very dumb to mess with the intelligence agencies. And she said, why? And he said, because they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back to you. That's the leader of the Democratic Party telling a news person on television that the president should watch his P's and Q's around the CIA and the FBI, that they're the ones who actually do run things, and that he better not tell people that they actually run things, because telling them will make them fuck with him. And boy, they did. They did Russiagate for 4 straight years. They lied, which we all know now was made up completely by the FBI and the Hillary Clinton campaign. Completely. And that there should be people in jail. They lied to the FISA court to get the phone taps on the Trump campaign. They lied. Who did? The FBI lied. How many times? About 17 times to the FISA court so they could spy on Donald Trump. They got the warrants, and they still couldn't find a crime to convict him of that they also hadn't already committed. That's why it took them so long to finally impeach him. They had to find a crime that they could say Trump committed that they weren't also guilty of. Anyway, I could talk about this all day long. This is really interesting. Can't wait to read
just devil's advocate. That's why we're the best, because places like Russia and China, their intelligence agencies have to answer to one guy. There's no democracy. At least here we have a democratic intelligence community.
People have.
Well, I'll end with this because it's linked to the corporations. These intelligence agencies are working for corporate power.
Of course, they've always have. That's why they're.
Yeah, they always have.
They're called the company.
Like MI6, CIA in Iran were working for the corporate sector and the oil interests. Like that, they've always worked the same, but they're linked in very specific ways. As I mentioned, BP and extracted £15 billion worth of Iraqi oil after the British invasion. The head of MI6 from 2009 to 2014, the year after he left MI6, joins the board of BP. He was also it gets better. He was also Britain's first special representative to Iraq after the invasion. He was appointed by Tony Blair. So and then he earns 1.1 million. We totted it up from the annual reports from BP since he became part of the board in 2015. So it's all enmeshed, you know. They're laughing at us. They're laughing at us.
So let's just real briefly. I just want to break it down how this works. So the corporation, in this case, being the military-industrial complex and a big oil, fossil fuel, they want to sell more energy to Europe, and they want Ukraine to go along with them, Ukraine being the breadbasket over there. And all the oil from Russia goes through Ukraine now to Germany and stuff like that. So they wanted to get control of all that, and they wanted to sell more liquefied natural gas, more energy to Europe, because right now Russia sells 40%. So what do? Okay, so the CIA then gets in bed with Nazis in Ukraine. They stage a fake.
Is it Netherlands too, or Norway helped?
And they, I don't know, but they did overthrow the democratically elected president of Ukraine because he was going to be closer economically with Russia than Europe. They can't have that. So the CIA institutes a coup. That's what they do. Then they institute it. They get a puppet in there. Then they get they get a war. They start a war. They provoke Russia into how did they do that, Jimmy? Well, they started shelling the Russian-speaking people in the eastern part of Ukraine who didn't want to go along with their Nazi-led coup of Ukraine. They're like, we don't want to go along with this coup government, and so they wanted to be independent. So the Ukraine Nazis said no, and NATO said no, and they started shelling those people, the people who lived in Ukraine. They killed about 14 to 16,000 of them over 8 years, even though they signed a peace agreement publicly that said they weren't going to do that anymore, and they're going to let those people be independent. All the while, the reason why they signed that peace agreement was to give Ukraine enough time to build up their military, so when they did finally provoke this war, they would have more of a military. And so the point of this war is so that we could sell more energy to Europe, we could break the economic partnership between Germany and Russia. That's what the point of this.
Tell me that's not worth it?
That's the whole point of this war. That's why we had a plan to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline before Putin ever invaded the Ukraine. So that's how you know that's what this is all about. Biden always, and everybody who's looked into this for a second knows what this is all about. And we've wanted to do this for a long time. So the CIA goes in, coups a government, they say boom, boom, and then they say we're trying to. And then when Putin invades, they say no, we're going to try it. We care about the Ukrainian people. No, what the CIA's plan is to get as many Ukrainian people killed as possible to bleed out Russia economically. It's not working. Russia's stronger than ever. They're now creating economic partnerships with people like China, with people like India, with people like Brazil, South Africa, India. So now there's Saudi Arabia started selling oil in other denominations beside the US dollar. Every bad thing that they said Trump was going to trigger in the world, they're doing right now with this Ukraine war sparked by the CIA. They did the same thing in Libya, the CIA. They did the same thing in Syria. And they did the same thing in Ukraine. So they put a lot of money into Nazis and opposition groups, and they foment a civil war. They do a coup. That's how this works.
They were connected to corporations from the start.
And it's all about corporations. It's all about money. It's all about fossil fuel. It's all about hegemony and imperialism. That's what it's all about. And that's why we're living in a world where the richest country the face of the earth has ever seen renders half of its population poor or low income. What do you call a system that does that? You call that a failed system. The United States is a failed fucking state. And if you don't think so, I'd like to drive you around Los Angeles, San Francisco, down any other goddamn city you want to go to, and I'll show you how this is a failed state. Anyway, we got to get going. Matt Kennard, thank you so much. The author of Silent Coup, How Corporations Overthrew the Democracy. Thanks for being our guest.
Thanks for having me, man.
Hey, everybody. Only $10 to go see my new stand-up special, COVID Lies Are Funny, at jimmydore.com. And come see us do a live show. We're going to be in Cohoes, New York, Hartford, Connecticut, Bakersfield, California, Baltimore, San Francisco, Huntington Beach, Rosemont, and Chicago, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, and more. We're going to be in New York, Stamford, Connecticut, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, San Diego, everywhere. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all our tickets.